Good evening. If you're joining us right now, you no doubt have been interested in what's been happening across your world this day. And we as TV47 have been at the forefront to gather, synthesize and broadcast the happenings around your world to you tonight. Just before I came on air, you saw for yourself history in the making. The American president and the Kenyan president, for the first time in many, many ways, and making many big, heavy, important, and long, things with long-term impact. Announcements, projections, pronouncements. We are here to help you make sense of all of that. And later on in our interview on Insight tonight, I have a guest who's best suited for just that, unpacking the complex and making it simple for you and I. So keep an eye out for that in a little bit. But first, here's what else is happening in your world tonight. Have a look. Tonight, missing Kenyan climber Cheruiyot Kirui found dead on Mount Everest.
We have an occasion to build synergies, to build partnerships that will not only solve our current problems.
President Ruto and President Biden ignite the stage at a historic joint press conference as President Biden makes a pronouncement to designate Kenya as a non-NATO ally.
Kenya and the United States stand together, committed to each other, committed to our people, and committed to building a better world.
Also tonight, the EACC to seize 614 million shillings in assets from former Nairobi County Finance Chief Jimmy Kiamba and his wife. All that and more tonight on the Daily Report. Yes, indeed. All that and more tonight waiting for you. And with me along this journey is Catherine Simaloy on sign language. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the news begins now. The 4-day state visit by President William Ruto to the United States of America has provided the perfect ambiance for Nairobi and Washington to strengthen the dalliance between the two that has officially existed for the past 60 years. Diplomacy experts opine that the visit has created an opportunity for the USA to assert dominance and influence on Kenya in regards to trade, debt relief, as well as security investment. Stanley Nyaringita unpacks this.
After 16 years since any African country was accorded a state visit in the United States of America, Kenya's alliance with the US seems to topple other countries in the African continent. The alliance may be favoring both countries, but what is in it for the superpower? Macharia Munene, a professor of history and international relations, opines that the influence that US has put on Kenya regarding the expected deployment of 1,000 police officers to Haiti as part of a UN-led force deploying to address the security crisis in the Caribbean nation could be one of the reasons why US President Joe Biden rolled out the red carpet for President William Ruto. The visit comes after the Trump years at the White House, which saw the freezing of relations between African countries and the US. Trump, who had no kind words for African countries, was seen as using the continent as an arena for US competition with China, which made many countries in the continent to face east, with China seemingly embarking on a well-resourced effort to build political influence and grow commercial relationships throughout the developing world. Ruto's visit in the eyes of pundits could be an opportunity for President Joe Biden to demonstrate commitment to Africa at a time when Washington appears to be playing catch-up in its engagement with the continent.
The regime has its own image issues. It wants to sanitize itself, to gentrify itself within the international space, and to even claim that it is now the headquarters of Africa.
The two leaders are set to announce a plan called the Nairobi-Washington Vision, which calls on creditor nations to reduce financing barriers for developing countries that have high debt burdens and to offer debt relief when necessary. The alliance, which has been enhanced by the historic state visit, may get controversial for Kenya if it is to continue facing east, as diplomacy experts explain.
They are going to talk about China, telling Kenya to stop dealing with China. That's what they're going to be saying. Cut down your links with China. And the reality is that this is not going to happen.
For the Biden administration that seeks to get a re-election this November in the 2024 polls, having an instrumental middleman, or in this case, woman, is also key. Role of U.S. Ambassador to Kenya, Meg Whitman, who was handpicked by President Joe Biden, cannot be downplayed when it comes to the interests of U.S. to Kenya. As curtains come down on the state visit Thursday, which marks 60 years of official U.S.-Kenya partnership, the deeper relationships that have been forged over the years continue to pose the question: what does the USA get to benefit from Kenya? Stanley Nyiringita, TV47.
And indeed, the question that Stanley Nyiringita has posed at the end of his wonderful and insightful piece is one that we shall be answering later on Insight tonight. But back home, the chasm between junior secondary school teachers and the government remains large. On one side, the junior secondary intern teachers insist that they will not be returning to teach until the government gives them permanent and pensionable terms. This is after the courts ruled that their internships are illegal. And on the other, the government, who is urging the interns to remain patient as they are to be absorbed after teaching for 2 years. Will they bridge the gap? Kisewa Emery with that report.
The dire situation in the education sector might persist as thousands of grade 7 and 8 students in public schools nationwide face paralysis for a second week in a row due to the ongoing strike by junior secondary school teachers. JSS intern teachers in Nairobi staged massive demonstrations in the Central Business District, including outside the Teachers Service Commission headquarters.
We need permanent and pensionable jobs. Again, we also want compensation for the times we have worked, because the court termed our engagement with the TSC as an illegal activity.
Their rallying cry echoes loudly. 46,000 JSS teachers are poised to flood the streets of Nairobi next week, continuing the push for permanent and pensionable terms from the government.
Hatutoki hapa, tutalala hapa kwa next week. National demonstration, watu wote hapa. 46,000 interns watakuja hapa.
They have condemned what they term as threatening tactics employed by the government, with show cause letters seen by TV47 being issued to JSS teachers who have been absent from work. The Basic Education Principal Secretary, Dr. Bello Kipsang, has urged the intern teachers to exercise patience, assuring them of confirmation after the 2-year internship period, purportedly part of the government's plan.
If they check in our budget for the next financial year, we have provided for their confirmation, because from day one we say that we shall be undertaking a 2-year internship program which will automatically take you to P&P. So for sure, they are just jumping the gun. If they are slightly patient, then they will have arrived where they were going to.
However, according to the contract signed by the teachers in February last year, they were offered a 1-year non-renewable contract that expired in December of the same year. The deadlock persists even as the Kenya Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers (GOPET) petitions the TSC, National Assembly and the Treasury to resolve the impasse. Kisewa Emery, TV47.
Now, we have been in Washington looking at exactly what's been happening over there. We've been paying extra attention and broadcasting all of that to you. And we want to join our team in Washington, led by George Maringa, to just give us a bit of a breakdown or a bit of a highlight on exactly what just went down. We just saw this, the joint speech by the two presidents, live and direct, beaming towards all of the world. We want to connect now with George Maringa. George, it looks like it's an afternoon over there. Talk to us. How's it going over there? What have you got to tell us? What are your impressions on what has just happened, George?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Victor. It is 13 hours, 13 minutes past 2 p.m., just after the joint press conference between President William Ruto and his host, Joe Biden, in the briefing room, inside the White House. And of course, we did see that the Haiti matter took center stage, and President William Ruto has defended the deployment of police to Haiti, whereas the specific date has not been given yet, but President William Ruto has maintained that the deployment to Haiti remains a collective decision, a collective effort. And of course, Kenya is leading the multinational force. And he has defended this, saying that Kenya has led these missions in the past. The question was asked, especially regarding the efficacy and what this means, because remember, Kenya is still dealing with the banditry situation. Kenya is also dealing with other aspects of insecurity. We've seen reports of what's happening, especially at the course of the last few months, the reports we've heard, and he has defended and he has said that that area is being managed. However, Haiti mission still remains on course, and that affirmation has been given, especially following that joint press conference at the White House here in Washington, D.C. The president has also maintained that, and pushed for the renewal of AGOA, and also has asked the U.S. to lead the funding, to increase the funding, especially to Africa. Those are some of the updates, some of the reflections that we have received and seen, especially right here in the United States, right here, especially regarding that state visit that has just occurred. Among other issues that, of course, the president has talked about is the investment in Africa, the calling for this investment opportunities and funding to increase, especially to Africa. That is something that President William Ruto is championing for most especially. The reason I'm doing this phone-held video is because we are just leaving in a short while. We were in the briefing room that is just behind me. On the other side is the main White House building. There is an address by President William Ruto. William Ruto is also leading the climate conversation at the African Union, and that will be happening at Hopkins Bloomberg Center at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced and International Studies. And that address and that conversation will be on matters climate crisis, green industrialization in Africa, and how the partnership between the United States and Kenya is catalyzing investment to support green growth and economic opportunity. After that event, we'll be coming later to the White House for that state dinner that is being prepared in honor of President Dr. William Ruto and First Lady Mama Rachel Ruto. I just heard Kenya on the move, so that is the call for us journalists from Kenya to move, to be able to attend to that event, that conversation, that address, especially by President William Ruto. But that and much more will continue following for you right here on TV47, even as we continue to update our viewers on this home of untold stories. But for right now, we have to head over to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies for that important conversation on the conversation in climate change. But of course, our viewers can always head over to our YouTube channel to be able to catch more details of that joint press conference between President William Ruto and his host, President Joe Biden. Victor.
All right. Thank you so much, George. Glad you were able to spare a moment. It looks like everything is quite fluid over there. Everything is moving fairly quickly, but we're glad that George was able to grab a couple of minutes and just brief us on what was happening over there. That's TV47 for you, ladies and gentlemen. We will spare no expense and no effort to bring you the absolute latest as and when we have it. So all the reasons to keep it right here. Now, let me bring you back home and to somewhat unpleasant news. And detectives at the DCI headquarters have grilled Thika Town Member of Parliament Alice Ng'ang'a and her counterpart from Gatundu North, that is Njoroge Kururia. And the two legislators were grilled by the homicide detectives as a fact-finding mission into the mysterious murder of a rider in Thika and the causing of bodily harm to yet another victim. Investigators wanted to know the circumstances under which Gatundu South Member of Parliament Gabriel Kagombe was forced to use his firearm during a violent confrontation that resulted in the fatal shooting. We shall be able to bring you that story in no time. Of course, the story has been done by our very, very own Franklin Wala, who just joined us recently, who's going to be spearheading a lot of our investigative journalism from the home of Untold Stories. But let's shift over to politics and across the nation, and the feud that has pitted Siaya Governor James Orengo and his deputy William Odwol has escalated. And the working relationship now seems to have worsened, even affecting their day-to-day duties. And this, of course, as our senior political reporter Elizabeth Mutuku reports. Odwol, at the moment, who appeared before the Senate Devolution Committee, claims that the county government has continued to frustrate him. But Governor James Orengo has dismissed the allegations, claiming that whatever is ailing his deputy governor is political relations, which have contributed towards a tough working environment. Let's have a look at this story.
Just 11 months past annulled impeachment, and Siaya Deputy Governor William Odwol is back to Senate, this time seeking to mend the deteriorating protracted relationship between him and his boss.
Good morning, my name is Bill Johnson.
Who have not been seeing eye to eye since Odwol impeachment was overturned by Senate. The duo separately appeared before the Senate Committee on Devolution and Intergovernmental Relations, where Odwol made allegations of being threatened. The DG claims that guns are being used to lock him out of his office.
After unsuccessful impeachment completely blocked me from any county activities, does not delegate to me any duties, has instructed executive members not to deal with me, has completely refused to invite me to cabinet meetings, as was the practice before.
Senators, amazed by the revelations made by DG Odwol, also claims that the county government has frustrated him by denying him facilitations, fees and allowances.
We are seeing people in the US with the president of the US enjoying meals, dining and wining. Members of the opposition with the president of the day. What sin has he done to say that he associates himself with the government of the day?
You cannot rein in when the political atmosphere does not allow you to do that. So I think, Mr. Chairman, this is an issue which we must consider soberly, and we must know that we are not living in a vacuum.
Rejoinder, Governor Orengo, while being cross-examined, revealed that Odwol has been out of office, operating from a different area, and that he has refused to work with him hand in hand while receiving funding and security from Kenya Kwanza government, denying all allegations leveled against him, insisting the hostile environment the DG has experienced is due to political formation.
I want to tell you without fear of contradiction that he is in a hostile territory. We are all politicians. He is in a hostile territory. He is in a hostile territory. And that's why he has some difficulty functioning within the main headquarters of the county. I offered to give him an alternative office.
Orengo also says he regrets appointing Odwol as his running mate in 2022 gubernatorial race, despite of numerous warnings, even from ODM boss Raila Odinga.
Through sleepless nights, because Dr. Bru here told me, you're making a big mistake. My own party leader told me, you're making a big mistake. It didn't take 2 months. And the problem was that as soon as I had been sworn in, that same day, I came to Nairobi to participate in the presidential election petition. And I left him running the county for 2-3 months. And when I went back, I think he was expecting a reversal of role that I would.
The committee seeks to mediate the duo's fallout and is said to have a report on the same. Elizabeth Mutuko, TV47, Nairobi.
Now, last night there was a developing story, and we gave it to you as soon as it started to hit the airwaves or the interwebs. But we have confirmation now. Kenyan mountaineer Joshua Cheriot Kirui, who went missing alongside his Sherpa guide on Wednesday on Mount Everest has been found dead. Kirui's body was found 62 feet or about 19 meters below the peak of Mount Everest. Nepal's Department of Tourism has said that Kirui had been on a mission to summit the world's highest peak without supplementary oxygen, attempting to become the first African to achieve the feat. He went missing just above the Hillary Step. Of course, the Hillary Step is famous, having been made famous by the great Sir Edmund Hillary, who was a pioneer on that mountain. Let's have a look at this story.
He named it the Big Project 2024, an eager attempt to be the first African to join the less than 200 people known to have summited Everest with no supplemental oxygen. And so the journey to conquer Everest for Cheruiyot Kirui began on 18th April this year. And after 5 days of trekking, Kirui was at base camp, which is approximately a little over 5,300 meters above sea level. Here, they stayed for 5 days, acclimatizing for the phase 2, which is climbing. And in the coming days, as per glaring details on his social media sites, he successfully completed summit rotations from Camp 1 to Camp 4 that stands past the 7,900 meters mark above sea level. On the 18th of this month, he was finally ready to get to the summit. Meters above the 8,000 meter mark has been infamously named the death zone, which Kirui was very well aware of. He wrote that despite his body being ready, due to the risks, he had put in place measures to battle the cold. Also with him, he had emergency oxygen in the event that, in his words, lights go out or if he went bananas, if time barred, body limit reached or unfavorable weather conditions. He was ready for the moment of truth after investing heavily physically, mentally, financially and even time-wise. However, this was not to be, results being death on the slope. Just barely meters from the summit is where his body was found, the last communication to base camp being on Wednesday, just after he had reached the 8,000 meter mark.
Right, whatever the outcome, you've really got to admire the effort, the single-minded focus that takes to attempt such a feat. I hope all of us take inspiration in facing our mountains, or the mountains in our lives, with the courage and the dedication that Cheruiyot showed. In other news, the Ministry of Health now says that there are stockouts of key vaccines with less than 2 months of stock available nationally for traditional vaccines, such as the BCG vaccine, the oral polio vaccine, and the measles rubella vaccines. Additionally, stock levels for most other routine childhood vaccines, including those supported by Gavi, are low, with only 3 to 6 months of stock available. And as Elizabeth Atieno now reports, AMREF, Africa CDC and the WHO have called for enhanced local production for vaccines, further urging the Kenyan government to set aside funds to tackle the vaccine crisis. Take a look.
Kenya is still grappling with an acute shortage of childhood vaccines, with 10 counties bearing the greatest brunt. And now, AMREF Health Africa CEO Dr. Githinji Gitahi has urged the government to ring-fence funding for vaccine procurement and distribution and incorporate a sustainable budget for vaccine procurement in the country.
And what that means is that the vaccines that are supposed to be bought from the country's own contribution or fiscal space will then end up with a shortage, because this whole entire plan of volumes is based on the cohort of births in a country.
The shortage of life-saving childhood vaccines in Kenya has been attributed to the 3.6 billion Kenya shillings debt owed to suppliers including Gavi and UNICEF. In its recent statement, the Ministry of Health says 1.25 billion Kenya shillings has been set aside to urgently procure routine antigens and replenish the life-saving vaccines in health facilities.
Without vaccination, that is going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a catastrophe for our young children, newborns, and even under 5s.
Kwa sasa, dawa zile ambazo ziko na upungufu ni zile za measles na zile za polio.
Stakeholders in the health sector say the local manufacture for vaccines is the only solution to the ongoing crisis. For instance, currently there are about 30 vaccine manufacturing plants in Africa. 9 do have adequate capacity for production. However, only 3 have the capacity to produce vaccines in the short term, that is 3 to 5 years.
And the vaccine they can produce are the 8 vaccines that are the most used for routine vaccination.
Africa CDC says the main challenge in local vaccine manufacturing is on financing and lack of adequate market.
Even if you produce the vaccines, if there is no market for the Africans to buy African products, all those efforts will be just nullified.
The investment in harmonization needs to be recognized from the very beginning. And if we're going to do pool procurement on a continental level, it's very, very important.
But we are also aware that the president is pushing for us to have a vaccine center in Kenya. So that one will actually sort out all our problems.
The ongoing shortage of life-saving vaccines poses a serious health risk to 1.6 million infants who might be susceptible to diseases like polio, tetanus, diphtheria, whooping cough, diarrhea, pneumonia, and measles. Elizabeth Atieno, TV47, Nairobi.
Now, more than 500,000 traders at the Gikomba market in Kamkunji constituency here in Nairobi are estimated to suffer losses, not in the least from tomorrow, actually, after the county government noticed them to demolish their stalls for allegedly being on riparian land. Beg your pardon, we need to take this again. About 500,000 traders at the Gikomba market are set to experience losses. This is after the county government told them that their stalls are built on riparian land. Now, according to a notice issued by Area Sub-Chief Stanley Kaberia, over 70% of these traders are situated close to the Nairobi River, which is undergoing cleaning in order to grow trees, which are supposedly to support the area in climate change related impacts. The business community, on the other hand, asserted that this is an exceptional spot for conducting businesses, and this, should the government decide to evict them, they should offer an alternative space to conduct business.
Atuonangi wakikuja kutusaidia. Vitu kienda maji atuombangi msaada. Kwa nini wanataka kutugonga hapa na tulalangi hapa? Kitu ya pili, kama wataanza kugonga, waanze kugonga kutoka Kamkunji. Unaona pala Kamkunji police station wakiteremka hivi tutakubali. Lakini kama watagonga kutoka Kamkunji hatukubali. Wacha tukufia hapa, ndio hapa ndio tunajua nyumbani na hakuna mahali pengine tunajua.
We ask the president, especially those who are having authority over us, to consider us in this matter, that we may continue to work. And if they don't want to consider us here in Gikomba, let them replace us and give us a place to work. We will be subjected to that.
The other time we saw the area MP, Hassan, alikuja hapa akasema this market has been declared an official market. Na mtumba in Kenya ndio inashikilia uti wa mgongo wa Mkenya. Mtu wa chini wote tunategemea mtumba. Watoto wetu wanasoma kupitia kwa kazi hii tunaifanya kwa mkono. Hakuna kazi, sisi tena hatuna certificates, we have good papers, but there is no employment in Kenya.
Tu ametoka shule juzi, amekuja hapa Gikomba hapa hustle tu kufanya nini, kuchukua ndizi, kuchukua avocado pale, afanye nini, auze ili apate maziwa yake ya kila siku. Akitolewa hapa, je, ataenda wapi?
Mimi saa hii niko na kama 20 years huku. Na hii maji hakuna wakati imewahi pita mahali ilifika. Haijawahi ua, hata wakati moto inakujanga huku haijawahi ua mtu. So sisi tumeridhika vyenye tu iko, sisi wenyewe tutajini.
On that note, let's take a short break. When we come back, the all-important conversation later on, we have the great Mark Bichachi right here with us in studio, ready to engage on that. We'll be right back.
Wazazi wangu walikuwa bit strict kwa sababu mamangu mwenyewe, mimi kutoka kuzaliwa sijailala nje.
The white small one, huyo ana sniff gunpowder na risasi na bomb. Alafu huyo mwingine ni Ridgeback ana sniff simba.
Even the employees knows that, so when in the boardroom is the chairman, the CEO, and the rest of.
At what point are you a wife?
The minute you get to that inside that door, you become now the wife.
Na kila maamuzi wanayoyafanya hufichua mengi kuhusu utu wao na uongozi wao.
We see God blessing us, and we now realize the power of giving,
also has to be rewarded back.
Kupitia kipindi Mfahamu Kiongozi, tunakuletea mahojiano ya kusisimua na uchambuzi wa kina kuhusu viongozi wetu.
Pick your core business as the bigger stones. Put them in your diary first. Give priority the bigger things.
Usikose kila Alhamis saa 1:30 jioni.
In a world where challenges are as common as opportunities, there are those who dare to defy the odds. They are the entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship isn't just about starting a business, it's about embracing uncertainty, pushing boundaries and turning dreams into reality.
Hata ambao ni pesa ya kusave, wallahi. Ambao mwaka ni pesa nyingi sana.
As long as you're earning something, there's always that opportunity to save. And you start with where you are.
The way we run the business is in a very unforgiving way, where every team member has to bring out their best.
So, to all the dreamers, innovators, and risk takers out there, remember, being an entrepreneur isn't just a job, it's a way of life. Join the journey. Become an entrepreneur. The Grind, Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Stay tuned to TV.
Now, if you're joining us right now, you are joining the all-important conversation on Insight Tonight. And tonight we have somebody who's no stranger to your screens. We have the great Mark Bichachi with us. He's an analyst par excellence. He's a communication strategist, and he wears many, many other hats. Karibu sana.
Asante sana. I should have you introduce me everywhere. It is very good for my ego.
Yeah, is that so? Fika bay, fika bay. All right, all right. But karibu sana.
Thank you.
Welcome to the home of untold stories.
Yes.
Right away. Talk to us. You're a communication strategist.
Yes.
Talk to us about how this trip has been communicated right from the beginning.
Well, you know, I'll talk about the communication on two sides. One on the sides of the United States, then on the side of Kenya.
Precisely.
The United States, in just simply inviting President Ruto to a state dinner, the first for an African president since 2008, and that was John Kufuor. And John Kufuor was major because he was basically redoing the Ghanaian economy. He was pulling up a Ghanaian renaissance, if you will. So it was a critical moment. And of course, this was a time when Obama was coming in and things like that. So it was an interesting time. For Biden to do so, one, during a campaign year.
Right.
Okay. Two, and to give Kenya the status and the pomp he's given it, it is a big statement. It's the biggest compliment the United States can give an African country. Yes. Number two is, I think the Republic of Kenya underplayed the importance of this trip.
Walicheza chini.
Walicheza chini.
Why?
First, I think it is because they wanted it to have the impact it has had. Because today has been big. I don't think there's a single person who can draw a point away from William Ruto today. Today he has been president for everyone in the deepest part of Azimio to the most hustler of the hustler nation. Simply because everything that he's been talking about has been talked about and delivered to the Kenyan people. If you just think about it, $1 billion in extra investments, extra infrastructure, extra help for the country of Kenya, plus being recognized as a strategic security partner.
That's huge.
That's huge. It's unheard of. This is the first country that I've heard of in Africa to get such recognition, and there are only 16 across the world.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to be delving deeper into the significance of that. Yeah. But also just in the run-up to this event, talk to us about the choice of delegation.
Yes.
You know, the Kenyan delegation there. A few criticisms on who was brought along, but also just on the whole, what is that group supposed to represent?
You know...
And did it succeed in representing that?
To be honest with you, when I look at the delegation and I see Duale, he needs to be there. He's the CS for Defense. I see Mudavadi. He's not only Prime Secretary, but he's the CS of Foreign Affairs. You look at Kimani Ichung'wah. He is the leader of the majority in Parliament. He is the one who's going to execute this agenda. And I can go on and on. I have not seen any senior politician who's not supposed to be there. And contrary to other pictures, when you look at the picture of the meeting today, you see a very balanced team. You can see the opposites sitting each other. You don't see a bloated cabinet representation from Kenya. You don't see unnecessary people. You see even the security advisor, former CS,
Monica
Juma. And
experienced hand.
Yes. So in terms of the team that the president chose, I would be at pains to say that he chose someone who was not supposed to be there. Even the celebrities I'm seeing that went to the various studios, those are the people who do need to go there. It's unlike previous times where people who are not running for athletics were wearing athletic gigs. Yes, yeah. But at the end of it all, even if you want to nitpick, what the president has achieved today is something that for him and his policy can only be equated to the time when Kibaki got funding back to Kenya. It can be equated to the time when the Chinese decided to pay for SGR and other projects. It is that big. It is that significant. And just to put it into perspective, the amount of funding that the president has gotten today is equivalent to roughly 1% of our GDP.
That much?
Remember, our GDP is just about $110 billion. So $1 billion is 10%, is 1%.
Significant.
Yes, it's significant. So in terms of raw numbers, if you look at the jobs and whatever it is that you want to look at, President Ruto, his delivery has overshadowed anything else that you might want to nitpick about it.
Speaking of nitpicking, yes, or perhaps just different opinions, yes, earlier on today, some of your colleagues in the, have opined that, hey, the Americans are good at making promises. I'm literally quoting one good professor. I say the Americans are good at making promises and very poor at keeping them. What would you say to that?
There's a difference between a promise that is discussed on phone. There's a difference between a promise that is being discussed at a departmental level where Foreign Affairs is talking about it, and there's a difference between a promise that is made at a state dinner and a president's seat. Those are not
for the eyes of the world.
Yes, those are not promises that are likely to be backtracked, unless you want to say that you're talking about the possibility of Trump pulling back on those particular deals. And I'll tell you he won't. And I'll tell you why. Biden has been tough on China. Trump started being tough on China. If this particular incursion by the United States into befriending Kenya is about replacing China as the best friend of Kenya, then I can assure you Trump will do more. Right? Number two, if it is about security, whether it is stabilizing the Sudan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Somalia, dealing with conflicts between Rwanda and Congo and what have you, there is no other country better placed in East Africa than Kenya itself. So whether you look at it in terms of a Democrat perspective or a Republican perspective, it will be very difficult and unprofitable, really, for President Trump, if he comes back, to undo what Biden has done. And also remember, the statement of making Kenya a strategic security partner is not a statement that any president can easily undo. Remember, there are only 16 countries that have got... Yes, and Biden did not say, my administration is doing it. And this is something that perhaps Kenyans need to understand.
And do you think we can learn from that, just on that point, in the sense of things that outlast a political regime?
Exactly, because what Biden has done, he is not doing something that is Democrat. And this is something that people need to analyze and really understand. What Biden has done, and whichever way you look at it, number one, let's say he's doing it because of Haiti. Let's give it that. If he's doing it because of Haiti, how long do you think Haiti is going to be a problem? And is it going to change being a problem when Trump comes in, if Trump comes in? No, it will still be a problem. What do they need? They need a country that is not European, that is not white, that cares for the people, that has a history of doing peace missions, and they can be trusted to do so. Kenya has offered to do that. If Trump wants to change that, it will take him 2 years just to stitch a deal. So these are not deals, again, like, for example, Coca-Cola pledging to put in 25 billion shillings worth of investment in Kenya. This is not a political decision. It's not that they're sitting
the money
there.
has to make sense.
Yeah, they're not sitting there with $200 million saying, what are we going to do? Let's give Kenya. No, these are not political decisions. Some of them... Let me give you another example. When you talk about the National Health Institute and its partnership with the CDC in the United States, these are things that are critical because, number one, what most people don't know is most research into human research, crop research, even animal research in this country is funded by the United States.
That's right.
Right? So it's funded by the United States. The United States stepping in to fund more is not just something that they're doing because they like Kenya. They're doing it because emerging diseases are now a worldwide problem. Nowadays, every time Ebola has been reported in Africa, Americans have had to be treated because of Ebola.
And it doesn't take too long before it gets there.
Yes.
I mean, the distance between where something breaks out to their shores is very short.
Yes.
Now, you did touch on this. I want you to tell me what you interpret from, first of all, just the choice in the stopovers.
Yes.
Right at the beginning, the Carter Library, we saw the interactions with the King family, the civil rights movement.
Yes.
We saw the visit to the Tyler Perry studios and all the other things, the Coca-Cola conversation, the health deals, all of those. What do you think is happening here?
Well, if you look at...
how should we interpret this?
If you look at what the president has been talking about in terms of his diaspora plan and his digital business plan, digital entrepreneurship plan, you quickly discover that all of his stops have been one targeted at that. He's talked about technology. He's talked about STEM, investment into STEM. He's talked about Silicon Savannah partnership. He's talked about the CHIPS program in the United States that he wants to be part of. So all of these things are congruent with his digital business plan for the country.
Right.
So that's congruent. Two, his visit to Tyler Perry Studios is a callback to when he talked about Talanta.
Talanta Hela and Talanta, all the Talanta programs.
Yeah. So you may not agree with the programs, that's up to you. But in terms of him following up on what he exactly is doing, it's exactly the same thing. In fact, if you look at his trip last year to the United States, which he did, you remember that those are the same things that he was pushing. Now, this is very important because one of the things that President Ruto needed to show us is he needed to show us that these things that he's talking about, online jobs, partnering with all of these things, how serious is he about it? He needed to show the Kenyan people, and he has done so. As to his visit to Martin Luther King memorials...
Sorry, just to take you back just a little bit. On that point, put yourself in the shoes of a young creative, a young content creator from Kenya.
Yes.
Guys who grew up, or guys who were watching the rise of Eddie Butita and the likes.
Yes.
Guys whom they saw on the
Actress,
all those guys from Churchill Live to all those guys. And these guys are ruling the digital space right now.
Yes.
Talk to us how impactful it is to see their role models, their guys, the Kawaida guys that they relate with on such a platform.
You know what is very critical with the democratization of technology? And I tell people this all the time. The distance between a Hollywood studio and your phone is getting shorter and shorter. Okay, so this is critical.
Guys, are you listening to that?
Yeah, the distance, the technology between Hollywood itself and your phone is shrinking. Your phone can shoot on 4K if you have 150K.
Right.
What is most important is two things. One is distribution. In the sense that when Butita, Ketaktres, Crazy Kena, whoever, does their production, other than the platform that is YouTube, how do they get distributed so well that their content is on demand in the United States, for example? So such partnerships, and what they do is they do not only give hope to the person who's listening to us at home and wants to follow the path of Crazy Kena and others, but it also gives hope to Butita, Ketakres, Kena, whoever you want to reference, when they go to such studios and they see what state of the art is, and then they can be able to judge what is the distance between them and success. Then you're also not only inspiring them, but also giving them a business plan which they can use. But what is most critical, and this is what I hope happens, is that Tyler Perry Studios should partner with Kenyan content creators to host those content creators on their platforms. Right? We want to see a Butita movie.
That's tremendous.
In Hollywood, right? We want to see, and we have, of course, many Kenyan productions on Netflix, but they are made for Kenya. We want to see them break out.
Crossover.
Exactly.
Crossover hit.
Yes. And that is one of the things when we were working in export promotion that was very important, is to make sure that Kenya is not only big in Kenya, but it's big elsewhere. And we've seen it's possible. Nigerians sing in their language, sing to their beats, produce their stuff in Nigeria, and now they are able to hold concerts at Madison Square Gardens and
fill it up.
Yeah. So there is a challenge there. But for the most important thing that Kenyans need to take away out of this is, one, AGOA is coming to an end, 2025. We are not sure what's going to happen. It's an election year. We've not finished the negotiations. Kenya did a brilliant negotiation with the UK immediately after Brexit. And that's why our tea, our coffee, our sweet potatoes going to the UK, yes, did not flounder as much. So similarly, on this side of the American side, we need to make sure that our EPZs continue delivering to the gap. We need to make sure that the jobs we have in the EPZs are still there for Kenyans. And that's the most important thing that Kenya can take out of this.
Now, Mark, there's something here that I'm sure people are wondering.
Yeah.
What does the US benefit in all this?
That's actually a brilliant question.
And as you think about that, something else just popped up just as we were preparing for this interview. Our very own Larry Madowo, whom we love and sometimes hate in equal measure. Larry says and claims that a lot of the US broadcasters were actually cutting away when President Ruto started to speak. And only came back when President Biden speaks. Now, this is a historic event like this. Talk to us about that dynamic. What does the US benefit from this, and how does the US market receive this pomp and color for such an African president?
So let's be very clear. The United States does not do things because it likes people. Okay? The West is not like us. I'll invite you to my house and there's no business we're discussing. We just want to, have some tea, right? By the time the United States gives you a state visit, trust you me, they have interests. So let's count the interests. Interest number one is to make sure they establish influence in Africa away from China. Okay, there is a diplomatic Cold War between the United States and China. The US is keen to start developing in Africa again. It is keen to compete with Chinese businesses in Africa again. It is keen to access African markets. So number one, it is the fact that Kenya, through President Ruto, much less Uhuru, has now looked west. And his diplomatic efforts are heading somewhere in the United States because he's a president who's been in power for hardly 2 years. And he's been able to be given that. So he's definitely giving the United States a window into Africa. That's number one.
All right.
Number two is the United States security interests in Africa. If you were to think about it, the only truly democratic countries, truly democratic, in Eastern Africa are Tanzania and Kenya. Everything else has its own issues. So what Kenya is for the United States is that it is an opportunity for democracy and peace. Tanzania is a bit closed off, right, as a country. But Kenya is willing to send troops to Somalia, Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, to Congo,
to Bosnia, earlier in the 90s.
you know. So Kenya is a security asset, and that is why it's been given access to military training, equipment, and to be fast-tracked when they need to buy state-of-the-art equipment and to be given military aid. So that already is a big deal. Then you've got to ask yourself the question. Africa is the largest untapped market in the world. It has about 2 billion people who are hungry for technology, hungry
There's
for
an
food,
appetite.
hungry for education, hungry for healthcare.
Even the culture.
Yes. So Africa, if you look at it, you've got to ask yourself, how do you access Africa? If you want to access Southern Africa, you do South Africa. You want to access Western Africa, you do Nigeria, right? You want to access Eastern Africa, where do you go? Kenya. So there is an interest in the Kenya's space, both as a leader in the East African community, but also, remember, Africa is implementing the Africa Free Trade Agreement. This is very important. So if you're looking at Africa and you're sitting in the States or in Europe, you're thinking, how do I begin to tap into the visions, dreams, and aspirations for Africans that Africans are planning for themselves? Now, this must come with a caveat. It must be Africa first. As far as Africans are concerned, we should go there with the Kenya first mentality. Because as they give us dinner, believe you me, it is also America first.
And I like that. I like that. Here's a question. Now there's a whole raft of questions here. First of all, I want you to talk to us about that that pronouncement about the non-NATO ally.
Yes.
You know, first of all, you have touched on it in terms of what benefits exist for the United States and what benefits exist for Kenya.
Yeah.
But listen, the world is watching. African countries are watching.
Yes.
First question, should Kenya be proud to be the choice of the United States in this? That's one. And a close second to that is this. How should we expect our neighbors and the other countries, the local geopolitics, the regional geopolitics of Africa, what sort of reaction should we expect from those countries in Africa based on that?
First, let's start here. In terms of military cooperation throughout the history of Africa, of Kenya, we know that we have had Batuki Nanyuki since forever.
Forever.
That is the UK. In the last 30 years, America has not been involved in any military operation the UK is not interested in, including right now with the Houthis, right up here in the Strait of Hormuz. So first and foremost, this is not new. Okay? We have had military cooperation between the United States and Kenya for over 60 years, right? Kenya has never militarily looked east or to Russia. It's never happened. Economically, we have looked east, but militarily, we have never looked outside of the United States and its allies. That's number one. So historically, we have that basis. But number two, strategically, you've got to ask yourself, the amount of resources that Russia promised last year in its Africa Heads of State Summit for the whole of Africa pales in comparison to what Kenya has gotten from the states in one visit. Okay? So in terms of military support also, in the war that is going on in Ukraine, and you are asked, whose equipment do you want to have access to? whose intelligence do you want to have access to? Whose partnership do you want? And then you are told between Russia and the States, who are you choosing?
Well, the answer is quite clear.
It's quite clear. So the truth is, and this is the thing, and for many people, and I only have this privilege because I worked for 4 years in export promotion, the diplomacy of the world is military, it is trade, then everything else follows, right? That's where cooperation starts. Trade is important. Military alliance, military support, access to technology, access to training, and all of those things are very critical. And typically, when you want military support, you go to the best.
Plain and simple.
Yeah, that's...
And you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So, talk to me. Okay, so this is happening. I mean, the eyes of the world are watching. The eyes of Africans are watching. How? What should we expect in terms of how, when the president now wraps up that visit, comes back home, what sort of reactions should we expect from our neighbors immediately in East Africa and the rest of Africa? That's one. But also, too, remember, in the early part of President Ruto's leadership, he was molding himself to be this Pan-Africanist. And there was a lot of support from African countries. They were saying, this guy from Kenya looks to be the man, looks to be the natural successor to the Kwame Nkrumahs of this day. That has somewhat changed. What are we expecting in terms of reaction in that degree, in terms of the perception of not just Kenya, but its leader, but also what sort of posture should we expect in terms of trade, in terms of, more like politics from our neighbors?
You know what is very interesting is we must look at our neighbors through a lens. So Congo, Sunday, had a failed coup involving American citizens. They've said some few savory words towards the Americans. You've got Rwanda, which has a very pro-Rwanda way of approaching these things, right? And then
Rwanda first.
Yes. You've got Uganda, which this LGBTQ war and them telling the IMF to take a walk is different for them. Now, for those countries, the relationship between Kenya and the States will not change the relationship between Kenya and them. But politically, it will be a talking point, right? It will be a talking point because, as you have said, Africa should not look to the West or the East as its savior. Africa needs to look towards Africa. And it's something even President Ruto has said, that Africa has to be for Africa. But that does not mean that we do not make allies. In fact, what I expect is many of the countries in Africa will now gravitate to Kenya to work closely because Kenya now has a direct access to a superpower.
That's right.
Right? If you look at Russia, for example, or China, and you tell me one country that has the status Kenya now has with the States, there's none. There's none.
There isn't.
So Kenya becomes a de facto big boy gatekeeper to the United States. Right? So in terms of the little politics here and there, yes. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, Kenya will become a port of call for help, right? Because they will figure if we are Sudan and we need help and we talk to Kenya, then Uncle Sam is just around the corner. So this particular partnership, especially this non-NATO partnership, is so critical in terms of peace in the region, but it will also make Kenya of demand. Right? Because if you want to deal with things and you're in our region and you know Kenya has a partnership with Uncle Sam, it's like if I know your pal is a billionaire, you'll become a bit closer.
I'll just suddenly be invited to many Arambes.
Yes.
But now, Mark, listen, with this, obviously, there comes a different kind of attention that may not be so good. Simply put, have we just painted an even bigger target on our backs, from towards the enemies of the United States? Remember what happened in 1998? It was after a closer relationship that Kenya was having with the United States. We had Fazul Mohammed and Al-Qaeda looking at Kenya and Tanzania as targets. Have we just painted a target on our backs, Mark?
The question is did that target ever leave? Because we've had problems with Al-Shabaab and ISIS consistently. We as citizens may not feel it because our security forces do a very good job in Somalia, at our border, in terms of gathering information, in terms of keeping the attackers at bay. But for all intents and purposes, Kenya is still at war with Al-Shabaab. So the target never really left. And it did not leave, not just because of now our collaboration with the United States, but also it became bigger when President Mwai Kibaki and later Uhuru Kenyatta and now William Ruto has had a continued presence in Somalia, right? Which by the way, a lot of terror organizations consider it being an ally of the United States. Because remember, any person, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the friend of my enemy is my enemy. So at the end of the day, Kenya has that target. Why not have that target and get better intelligence, get better partnership, get better equipment, get better training? Why would you not do that? Illogically speaking, it is the next best thing to do, right? And if you look at the horizon, if you take your crystal ball, the biggest danger that the world faces is not a non-powerful United States. It is a United States that stops partnering. Okay?
Tell me why you say that.
Trump, and why people fear him, is because he wants to pull back from things like NATO. Like he pulled out from the Paris Agreement, pulled out from the Iranian Agreement. So American isolationism, them closing you out,
you think that's a world threat?
That's a bigger danger than them continuing being who they are. And if you listen to any analyst, and I do a lot of this work, if you listen to any security analyst, they'll tell you the biggest international threat, even to the war in Ukraine, is not that the United States does not have the military capacity to overcome Russia. It is that if Trump comes and he decides not to support Ukraine, then France and Britain will not be able to carry that weight. So if America is withdrawing, do you want it to withdraw with you or without?
Very good question. And on that note, Mark, on the home stretch of this interview, let's bring it home. Listen, you're the president. You're coming back from the US on a high.
Yes.
What sort of political scenario are you coming to back at home? How do you think the Kenya Kwanza government is going to sell or communicate all the goodies that they've come with from the US? And tell me, how significant is this going to be on how Kenya Kwanza, the posture of Kenya Kwanza, heading into what's remaining of the second half of their administration, the first term?
First thing, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Our young people, joblessness, and the resources they need. As soon as possible, those scholarships that are being offered, job opportunities that are being offered, investments in terms of Coca-Cola investing into Kenya, and all of those things need to start happening. The patience window for Kenyans is small. So you'll say these good things, celebrate them. But if in 2 months they're not seeing some movement, then they begin to forget, and then you will have a hard time convincing them again. So it's very important that when he lands with his team, he puts the ball on the ground and hits the ground running as quickly as possible. That is going to be very critical. The other thing that is going to be very important is how he's going to handle the Haiti issue. It is going to be in the news constantly. It is going to be monitored carefully, and every single thing that goes wrong will go back to, you went to have dinner. And so it needs to be managed quite carefully. And I'm speaking now like a strategist, because that is a communication risk for them. Haiti is a big, big communication risk. The other thing that is going to be very important is that target that you talked about, that now Kenyans should feel more secure, right? That's going to be very, very critical. That Kenyans need to feel more secure in their streets, need to feel more secure in their border towns, and they have to feel like this particular aid that they've gotten is actually going to work. What is going to happen also politically is his detractors will have to ignore this trip. They will have to ignore it because there is very little to take away from it. And scoring 1 billion, you know, and not necessarily in loans, investments and things like that, is a big thing.
Hard to argue with.
It's 2 billion, my friend, times 130 is 260 billion. Right. That is a Eurobond.
But now there's already questions about the cost of the trip, regardless of who financed it. Yeah. There's also the kind of the juxtaposition of you're going over there to rub shoulders with the high and mighty. The JS teachers on strike. There's still a healthcare crisis. There's still problems in the Northwest. Yes. The economy is still in the tank. There's still people who are concerned about this Finance Act and so on and so on and so on. So how do you expect, what would you advise Kenya Kwanza to tackle? What posture?
The posture they need to come with is that, one, Kenyans have forgotten about the 210 billion jet. Because today he's scored $1 billion, right? So he can be forgiven. What Kenyans are going to expect is the same vigor, pomp, happiness, and achievement they've made in the United States. They need to come here and do the same thing. They need to start declaring victories against cattle raiders. They need to give aid to the people on strike. They need the flood victims. They need to humanely move people who have been caught up in the riparian land in the story that you just showed. So the Kenya Kwanza, when you come back, which camera should I look at? That one. Kenya Kwanza, when you come back. Yeah. The spirit of victory you have, bring it for every Kenyan. We need to feel it whether we sell Mutumba, whether we live in Baringo, or we live in Githurai. That's what we need to feel.
Absolutely. Now, Mark, just real quick in one sentence before I let you go.
Yes.
Mark, Riggy G, Mount Kenya politics. You know, talk to us about that.
I'll give it to you in one sentence. Riggy G became deputy president not being kingpin of a tribe. If he's looking at 2027, he must ask himself, why will the president need him? And therefore, he goes back home.
And on that note, one last chance. That's your camera straight there. Give a message to the country, your parting shot.
Guys, let's have hope. Things may have been difficult. Let's have hope. Let's hold each other up. And most importantly, hold your politician, your governor, your MCA, your president to account. These promises they're making you, make sure they deliver. That's the only tribe we should belong to, delivery.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been the great Mark Bichachi, analyst, strategist par excellence, somebody, a man of insight, so to speak. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for sharing your insight on Insight tonight. Good people, that has been what we had to offer for you this evening. Thank you for choosing us to inform you of what's happening across your world. Up next is a turbocharged, supercharged sporting experience that is VAR. Keep it right here. My name is Victor Muyakane. Good evening and God bless you. Thank you so much.
And I agree.
How could I say water?
Oh.